the Jews knew Hebrew and they knew Aramaic. Aramaic is the language of the Talmud. Jews knew that. Hebrew is the language of the Bible. And they spoke Arabic. Now the Jews said, isn't this interesting? These three languages resemble each other. Their vocabularies are similar. Grammatical forms are similar. And the Jews began to develop what we call comparative linguistics, comparative languages, showing the relationship of languages to each other based on these three languages that are similar. And then the Jews began to write poetry. Now, here's an interesting feature of Jewish life in the Islamic Arabic world. When it came to writing prose, let's say philosophy or science, the Jews wrote Arabic. This was the language of science and philosophy. And anything secular, medicine, for instance, medical books are out. When it came to poetry, the Jews only wrote Hebrew. To them, this was to be a model based on the most perfect Hebrew, and that's the Bible. So all Jewish poetry in Spain is Hebrew poetry. So they are writing their philosophy books in Arabic, their poetry in Hebrew. And all the great philosophy books written at that time by Jews were written in Arabic. This was the language of philosophy, and the Arabs had already developed terms and philosophical concepts that could be expressed in Arabic. Of course, translations from Greek, because Aristotle and Plato and Aristotle were basic education in this great renaissance of this period. So Arabs were writing philosophy, and they were developing their own philosophies based on Islam, and yet in some ways departing from Orthodox Islam. In fact, some of the great Arabic philosophers already developed ideas which you could say hedged on or were a little bit at the edge of what we might call heresy, a little bit off the beaten path of true Orthodox religion. But nevertheless, this was the development of the philosophical system. And the Jews wrote philosophy as well, and they wrote philosophy in the Arabic language. Now, the Arab Muslims were very strict about not representing the human figure in art. The Bible says, do not have any kind of representation of pictures or statues. The Jews observed that in the days of the first temple. They began to make pictures and mosaics and sculptures in the Greek period, and we have some of the great works of art, really great works of art, in mosaic and in fresco painting done by Jews in the Greco-Roman period, because they said, these are works of art and they're not idols and we're not worshiping them, it's just beauty, And some of the great rabbis said that, it's okay. But then the Muslims came on the scene and they said, this violates the laws of the Bible. The Quran adopted this from the Jewish Bible. No figures, no images. And of course, in Arabic art, they excelled in design, they excelled in architecture, they excelled in many expressions of art. No human figures ever represented in Arabic Islam. I said Arabic Islam because in Persian Islam you have pictures. And the Persians became great artists, and they would make pictures of human beings. They felt that it was fine. But the Arabs also used calligraphy for design. So the Jews did the same thing. And what the Jews excelled in was in poetry and in literature. We don't know of any kind of painting or anything that was done. By the way, this Islamic influence was so great that in Christian Europe, a movement started in the 9th century to avoid any kind of representation, and it was called the iconoclastic movement. That is, the religious Christians would go around with hammers and they would smash icons, that is, pictures, and destroy any kind of human representation. This lasted for a while. In fact, one of the emperors of Constantinople, Leo the Isaurian, was a leader of the iconoclastic movement. He said, we've got to destroy all of these pictures. They're against the will of God. They're against the Bible law. But eventually they calmed down. And the Romans, the Western Christians, wouldn't accept it. They used their statues, and the Eastern Christians finally agreed that they would only accept icons, that is, flat pictures. And of course, that became a great form of art in Eastern Christianity.